How to Sew the Hunter's Star Block by Amber Makes. This is part of the Sampler Quilt Block of the Month, and you're going to make 3 different Hunter Stars blocks in whichever colourway you've chosen. Follow me and I'll show you how. Cutting out. Take the fabric panel from your kit and give it a press to start with, and then if you have a look at it you can see all the fabrics are labelled and the number of the fabric is on the top edge, and that's important so that you know which way to cut it. So cut around all the fabric pieces, leaving the label above them. You can just cut roughly round them because you're going to be subcutting those into shape in a moment. You'll also have some background fabric in your kit, which will be a different colour depending on which colourway you've chosen. So you can see here how I've cut them out. I've left a little bit of white all the way around, and I've left the number above the top because then you'll know which way to cut them out and also which fabric is which. So here's all the 4, 5, 6, fabric 7. Those are all the fabrics that you're going to be using to make these blocks. So the instructions tell you how to cut them out. So I'm just showing you from fabric 1, cut across the width. So you leave the label at the top and you cut the strips across the width from one side to the other. The instructions tell you what size width strips to cut and then also what to subcut them into. Once you've done that, remember to label each of the pieces as it's detailed on the instructions. So you can see here fabric A whole square, fabric A HST. So I've labelled all of them, then I know which is which. Once you've done that, sort them into piles. They've all labelled with block 1, block 2 and block 3. So sort them into all the pieces for block 1, all the pieces for block 2 and also all the pieces for block 3. And then it just means that when you come to make the Hunter Star blocks, you can make one block at a time and that you know that you've got all of the right pieces. So here are all the print fabrics, and then with the background fabric, again, the cutting instructions are all listed in your printed instructions. So cut those all to size and put those into the piles as well. And now all your fabric is cut out and neatly labelled, so you're ready to start sewing. How to make 4 at a time half square triangles. Take 2 of the pieces and lay them right sides facing. So I've got the background fabric and one of the print fabrics, and pin them together. So the instructions will tell you which fabrics for which blocks, but you need to follow this set of instructions when it says to make 4 at a time half square triangles. Pin them together and then sew together all the way round using your normal 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then it will look like this. So you can see it's right sides facing and I've sewn it together all the way around. Place it on your cutting mat and then cut from one corner to the opposite corner so that you're cutting diagonally. Once you've done that, don't move the fabric. Move your cutting board if you've got a rotating one, or just turn the board, but don't move the fabric. And then cut from the other opposite corner. So you're making 2 cuts in total, and then when you separate them, you've got 4 triangles. So these are your half square triangles. Place them on your ironing board or mat, and then open them up and press the seam allowance over. I like to press it over to the darkest side, just so that the fabric doesn't show through, but press them all over to the same side. I start off by doing this by finger pressing. I just find it's a little bit easier because of these small triangles, if you just finger press them to start with, and then use your iron to press them nice and flat. It makes it a lot easier when you trim them to shape if these are really nice and flat. Now these half square triangles are a little bit bigger than you need, so for accuracy this is why we do it. We then trim them to shape and then you have perfect half square triangles. So take one of them. We're going to cut these into 2 inches square. So place the diagonal line on your ruler across the seam, and so that you can see that you've got the 2 inch mark centrally, and then turn it round and place it so you've got the 2 inch square on your ruler on the corner and the line going centrally, and cut up the side and across the top. And then you've trimmed that half square triangle. It's only a little bit taken off, but you now know you've got a perfect 2 inch square, which makes your block much more accurate. So I'm just showing you, double check that. Repeat that with the other 3. And then you now have 4 really neat and accurate half square triangles. It's a very fabric efficient way of making triangles, so pop these to one side to use for your block. How to make 8 at a time half square triangles. So this is another method that you'll be using in the blocks. The instructions will tell you which fabric pieces. So take one of the fabric pieces, the lighter one, and on the wrong side of it, draw a diagonal line from one corner to the opposite corner. Obviously, with this plain background fabric, there isn't a wrong or right side, but if you're using another fabric, it's always on the wrong side. So now you've got 2 diagonal lines. Now place this piece of fabric that you've drawn lines on right sides facing with the other square. Again, the instructions will tell you which squares to use when you're making yours. Pin these together all the way round. You're going to be sewing either side of these drawn lines, so if you just place your pins, making sure they're at least 1/4 of an inch away from the lines, you won't need to remove them when sewing. Now sew these together 1/4 of an inch either side of those drawn lines, so that you will be sewing 4 seams in total. And then it will look like this. So you can see, I'll show you on the other side, this is the sewing lines. You can take those pins out now. And now you need to cut it into 8. So take your ruler and cut along the drawn lines. So you're cutting between those seam lines. Turn your mat. Don't move the fabric. And then cut along the other drawn line. So you're cutting between the seam lines. You've now got 4 triangles. But to make it into 8 triangles, cut centrally through, line up the ruler at the top so the line is straight, and cut centrally through the 2 triangles, and then don't move your fabric but move your board and cut centrally through the other 2 triangles. Make sure the line on the ruler at the top is level with the raw edge of the fabric. So now you've made those 4 cuts, you've divided it into 8 half square triangles. So take your ironing board or mat and open them all up, and just finger press them to start with towards the darker fabric, and then give them a press because they need to be nice and flat before you do the trimming, and then repeat that with all 8 of them. So now I've pressed them all open, I've got the 8. So now I just need to trim these to size, and they need to be 2 inches square. So place one of the triangles on your mat and place the diagonal line on the seam, making sure that the 2 inch is centrally. So you've got a little bit of fabric to the left of the 2 and a little fabric to the right of the edge of the ruler. Cut along the side and along the top. The fabric pieces are calculated so that you will trim off just a little bit, but there is enough to trim. And then trim the other 2 sides. So make sure you line up your 2 inch square on the raw edges of the left and bottom side, and then trim along the right hand side and along the top. And now you've trimmed one of your half square triangles into a perfect 2 inch square. Repeat that with the other 8. And now you can see I now have 8 half square triangles. Again, a very fabric efficient and quick way to make 8 half square triangles. So put these to one side and you'll be using them in your block. So let's start by making Hunter Star Block 1. The first thing you need to do is make the half square triangles. So take the fabric pieces that you've put aside for Block 1. You just need the 4 HST pieces, the 4 background and the 4 print. So take one of the background fabric HSTs and one of the print HSTs. Pin the labels back on the other so you remember which is which. And then make 8 half square triangles following the instructions or the video that was just before this to see how to do it. Once you've done that, there's your 8 half square triangles that you've made from those 2 fabric pieces. And I've already trimmed them to size, so they're all perfect and ready for the block. Then you need to repeat that with the other 3 fabric A HSTs and the BF HSTs background fabric. So put those in pairs, draw the lines on, following the instructions for the 8 at a time HSTs. And so make another 8 from each pair. And then you will have in total 32 HSTs. And they'll all be ready to put into your block in a moment. Making the centre HST blocks. So in order to make the centre HST blocks, take 4 of the HSTs that you've just made and place them right sides up in the arrangement that I'm showing you here. There's also a diagram in the instructions. So you can see that 3 of them are placed in one direction, one of them is just turned. Place the 2 in the top row, right sides facing, pin together and then sew together, and then place the 2 in the bottom row, right sides facing, and then pin together and sew together. There's a diagram in the instructions that shows this exact layout, which might be just easier to double check that you're sewing everything in the right way. So once you've done that and you've made the top row, press the seam in the top row to one side and the seam in the bottom row to the other side, and then place those 2 rows right sides facing and nest the seams by pushing them against each other until they stop, and then that will make sure they match up exactly. And then pin them together at the seam just to make sure it matches, and then pin at either end. I'm just going to put another diagonal pin in because that's my placement pin, and then sew those 2 rows together. And then this is one centre HST block. I've pressed that seam open. Repeat that to make 4 centre HST blocks. In total, this will form the star in the centre of your hunter star block. And then pop those to one side. Making the corner HST blocks. So the corner HST blocks are made in the same way, but the little HST squares are orientated slightly different. So place the 4 of them right sides up in the arrangement shown here and in the diagram, so you can see 3 all face the same way, and that one in the top left is just twisted. So place the 2 in the top row right sides facing and sew together, and the 2 in the bottom row right sides facing and sew together. Once you've done that, they will look like this. Press the seam in the top row in one direction and the seam in the bottom row in the opposite direction, and then place the top row and the bottom row right sides facing and pin together. It really is worth checking as you go along that when you lay them out before you sew them together, that they're exactly the same as the diagram, and that you've got that one HST that's facing a different way. And then when you actually sew the rows together, double check. It just saves unpicking later, because it's the orientation of these HSTs that creates the hunter star block. Sew that together, and that's one corner HST block. I've pressed the seam open. Repeat that to make another 4 identical. So you can see here how the HSTs are placed, and these 4 are identical. Again, pop these to one side for assembling the block. Assembling the block. So you need to take all the hole squares. So you've got the fabric A hole squares and the background fabric hole squares. So I'm just putting the labels back on so you can see them. And then the centre blocks and the corner blocks. I put them into piles because the centre blocks are all the same and the corner blocks are all the same. Now, following the layout diagram that's in the instructions, or you can follow what I'm doing here, lay out all your blocks. Now, you can lay them out row by row, or like I'm doing here, I'm laying out all the whole squares first. I just find that's a bit easier with placing the corners and the centres, but it's up to you. Just make sure that you follow either what I'm doing here or the layout diagram, the block diagram in the instructions, which is printed in both colourways. Then take your centre and your corner blocks and put those in. So these go in the centre. Now, check as you're laying them out that you rotate them so that you form this star shape. So if you look at that there, once you've laid them down, just double check it looks like a star shape. Then take the corner blocks, and again, these need to be rotated to form the pattern. And this will create the star. It does mean as well as if you ever want to use this again and make more hunter stars, if you do this, then those corner blocks will create stars if you join them to another. Now, once you've done that, double check always against the diagram to make sure you've got everything the right way. Make sure that the corner and the centre blocks are rotated correctly. Pin together each of the 4 blocks in the 4 rows. So I'm pinning this onto this. Make sure they're right sides facing and that the raw edges match. And because your whole squares are the same size as the corner and centre blocks, once they've been made like this, then they all fit together nicely. But just do make sure that you've got everything rotated in the right way, and then it will create this beautiful star pattern. So I've now pinned all the pieces together for row 1. Sew those together and then repeat that to pin and sew together row 2, then row 3, and then row 4. Once you've done that, it will look like this. Now what I've done is I've pressed my seams in opposite directions. So in row 1, I've pressed them to the right, and in row 2 to the left. Row 3, I've gone to the right, and row 4, I've gone to the left. And the reason for this is so that you can nest the seams, and then it makes them a lot easier to match up because you've got the bulk of the seam allowance facing in separate directions. Now, place row 1 and row 2 right sides facing. Start off by matching up the seams by nesting them together. You can push a pin through the seam and into the one below. If you place that pin vertically, that will hold the seam together and to make sure it matches up. And then pin it together at the end. And then again, match the seam. So you can either do that as I'm doing, using that vertical pin, or you can just nest them by pulling one seam slowly across the other, and then the seams will nest, sort of crash together because of the different heights of seam allowances, and then you can match them neatly. So work your way all the way along. So the most important thing is you match the seams and that you keep the raw edges matching as well on the top and the sides. So you can put a pin between the seams as well if you like. I'm only doing that not because I'm seam matching there, but just because I want everything to stay level with those raw edges. And also by pinning, if you've got a seam that's pressed open like this one, if you pin it together, it just holds that seam open. Now sew that together, and then sew row 2 to row 3, pin it together matching the seams first. There are more seams to match on that one, and then pin and sew row 3 to row 4. Once you've done that, it will look like this, and Hunter's Star block 1 is finished. I've pressed all those seams open for a nice flat finish, and there you go, you have completed your first Hunter's Star. Now we can make Hunter's Star block 2, and again we'll start by making the half square triangles. So take all the pieces that you've labelled for block 2, so you've got background fabric half square triangle squares, you've got all of the whole squares, and then you've got the print HST squares as well. So unlike block 1, you've got 4 different prints for these. So you've got fabric A, fabric B, fabric C and fabric D. Now following the 8 at a time half square triangle instructions, just like you did with block 1, place these all right sides facing, draw the diagonal lines on them, cut out the triangles and then trim them to size. And then they will look like this. So you've got 8 of fabric A, 8 of fabric B, 8 of fabric C, and 8 of fabric D. So these are now ready to make into the centre and the corner blocks. Making the centre HST blocks. So we'll start by doing the fabric A ones. So take 4 of the fabric A HSTs from your pile of 8. You only need 4 of them, and place them in the arrangement that's shown in the block, in the diagram in the instructions, or by following what I've done here. So just like with before, you've got 3 that face in one direction and 1 that's rotated. Pin the 2 HSTs in the top row together, and then pin the 2 in the bottom row together. And then sew them. So you can see these centre HSTs are made the same as you did with Hunter's Star block 1, it's just different fabrics. Press the seams in opposite directions and then place the top row right sides facing with the bottom row. Make sure that the seams might match up either by nesting them by pulling one gradually over the other until you feel that they match, or you can place that vertical placement pin in, and that will give you a really accurate seam join. Place a diagonal pin across there and then remove that. Sew that together, and then that's a fabric A centre half square triangle block. Now repeat that with all the other print fabrics. So these, you take the fabric B, and again make sure you place them in the order. What's quite good is if you've done one of them, you can just follow that and copy it. So remember, you have 3 HSTs that face one way, and the 4th one, which is in the bottom right-hand corner, is rotated to face in a different direction, and this is what will create the star pattern. So I find it's easier to lay out the 3, so the 2 in the top row, the 1 in the bottom left, all in the same direction, and then that 4th one, just rotate it. Now sew those together all in exactly the same way, and now you have your 4 centre HST blocks, 1 in each of the fabrics. So put those in a pile and put them to one side for assembly later. Making the corner HST blocks. So now you've got 4 of the fabric A left over, so these are for the corner ones. So again, place them right sides up as shown in the diagram. You've got 3 that face one way and 1 that faces another way, different to the centre ones, as you can see. So the top left and the bottom row face one way, and that square that's in the top right is rotated. That's why it's important that you do the centre ones and then you do the corner ones, because the rotation is different in order to create the star pattern. So sew the 2 in the top row together and the 2 in the bottom row together. Press the seams as before in opposite directions. Make sure you've got the top row above the bottom row. And then pin them together, matching the seam first. And then pin at either end. And then sew those 2 rows together, and that's 1 corner HST block. Press that seam open and then repeat that with the 4 remaining fabric B. So again, place all the ones that are facing in one direction, so top left and the 2 bottom rows, and then the 1 in the top right, rotate it. You'll soon get the hang of this. You'll work out as you're doing it the best way to do it by following the diagrams. But if you can see like this, I find it easier to place all the ones that are facing one way and then place the one the other. And just keep double checking against the diagram, just to save you some unpicking if you have them facing in the wrong way. And then lay out all of the ones for fabric D. I find it easier to lay them all out like this, and then I can quite quickly see before I sew together if everything looks correct. So sew these together, top row, bottom row, and then sew the 2 rows together. And now you have created your 4 corner HST blocks in fabric A, fabric B, fabric C, and fabric D. I'm just rotating them so you can see what they will look like. You can see the sort of the diagonal lines on them. So plop those to one side so that we can start assembling the block. Assembling the block. So take all of the whole squares and all the centre HST blocks and all the corner HST blocks, and then lay them out following the diagram as I'm doing here. So with the last one, I laid out all the whole squares first. This time I'm going to lay out 1 row at a time. It really doesn't matter which way you do it. It's up to you, as long as it looks the same way. But do keep your corner HST blocks in one pile and your centres in another. It just makes it a lot simpler to make sure that you put all the right things together. So you can see with the layout that we've got the fabric A is in that top left corner, all the fabric B is in the top right, the fabric C will all be in the bottom left, and the fabric D will be in the bottom right. As you're laying out, you will see how this works. Just move them out of the way so you can see the bottom row. So you can lay them out in whichever order you want, as long as you follow the diagram or this layout here. And then before you sew them all together, I always have a little double check to make sure that the stars look correct. You can see where the points of the stars work, and to make sure the same fabrics are together. And then just like we did with Hunter Star Block 1, sew together all the pieces in the top row, then the bottom row, making sure on the second and the third row that you match the seams. and then row 4 where you don't have any seam matching. Once that's done, make sure you press the seams in opposite directions, so the odd numbered rows in one way and the even numbers in another way. Again, before you sew them all together, double check against the diagram to make sure that everything looks correct. But now you're on to block 2, you'll soon see if it doesn't look right, if the star shapes aren't formed. And then sew row 1 to row 2, and then row 2 to row 3, and then row 3 to row 4. And once that's done, you've now finished Hunter Star Block 2. I pressed those seams open to keep it nice and neat and flat, and you can see how the 4 fabrics create the star to give a more variegated and quite a pretty look. Now we can make Hunter Star Block 3. And we'll start by making the half square triangles. They're made in the same way as before, but this time you're going to use the 4 at a time. Start off by putting all of these fabrics together into pairs. If you look at the instructions, because we've got lots more fabrics used in this one to give an even more variegated look, we're pairing up lots of different fabrics, which is why we're making 4 at a time. So lay them all out, so you've got all the HST squares. Now what I do, because I need to remember which one is which, is keep the label, once you take one, so I'm taking a fabric A, keep that label on the fabric A so you remember. So the first one you're going to do is do a fabric A and a background fabric HST square. And this time we only want 4 half square triangles, so follow the 4 at a time half square triangle instructions I gave you at the beginning. This is where you sew them together all the way around and then cut them into 4 triangles and trim them. And that's your 4 fabric ABF HSTs. Now you need to repeat this, and I've put them all together. So I've got all of them labelled and put together. If you follow the instructions, you will see how it's all done. So you've got a fabric A, fabric D, a B and a background fabric, a B and a D, then you've got a C and a background. You would make 2 sets of those. Then you've got a C and a D, and another C and a D. Just follow the instructions and you will soon see which ones you've got to put. So pin them together in pairs, and then following the 4 at a time HST instructions, make them all up. So there we go, I've got A and BF, A and D, B and BF, B and D, C and BF, and C and D. And that's all your half square triangles now finished. Making the centre half square triangle blocks. Now you're used to this process now, but obviously we've got different fabrics that we're going to use in this. So take the HSTs that it says in the instructions. For this one we've got an A and a BF, an A and a D, a C and a BF, and a C and a D. And place them in the arrangement shown in the diagram, or just by following what I'm doing here. Pin and sew the top row together, pin and sew the bottom row together. You're used to this now. Once you've pinned and sewn the 2 rows together and press the seams in opposite direction, place the top row right sides facing with the bottom row. Remember to match up the seams and sew them together. So the important thing with this Hunter Star Block 3 is all about the fabric arrangement, because I've gone for a really variegated effect here, so that if you ever want to use these instructions again and make a big Hunter Star quilt, you'll know how it works by using different fabric arrangements, because some Hunter Stars blocks quilts use just 2 and sometimes more, but you'll have got the practice together how we've got all of these different fabrics, and you'll see in a moment how that creates a really nice variegated Hunter Star. You make 2 of those because there are 2 different sets. So that was set A. And then to make set B, again you make 2 of these. Place the 4 half square triangles in the order shown in the diagram, or if you just copy what I've done here. Remember, just like before, we have 3 triangles facing one way and half square triangles one way and one that you rotate. Sew the top row and the bottom row together. And then once that's done, sew the top row to the bottom row. So for this set B, you're using fabric BBF, fabric BD, fabric CBF and fabric CD. But just read the instructions because that will help you to see how it works. And because you're using more fabrics, different prints here, it is worth double and triple checking to make sure that you've got the right HSTs together so that your finished block has that really nice multicoloured variegated effect. So sew the top row to the bottom row, and that's one set B. Make another set B in exactly the same way. So you can see that these are identical. I'll just rotate it so you can see that they're the same. So there's your 2 set B, and there's your 2 set A. And your centre HT blocks are finished. Making the corner HST blocks. So take all the 4 HSTs that you need for set A and place them in the order that I'm showing you here, or you can use the diagram in the instructions. So remember, you've always got 3 HSTs facing in one direction and one that's rotated. Pin the 2 in the top row together and pin the 2 in the bottom row together. And then sew those, so sew the top row, sew the bottom row, and then press the seams in opposite directions. Double check against your diagram or following this video to make sure that you've got the top row above the bottom row. Match the seam using that vertical pin. When they're little squares like this, it does make it a bit easier, and although you have trimmed them to be exactly the same size, it just helps to match that seam with a vertical pin, and then pin across and sew the top row to the bottom row. Press the seam open to keep it nice and flat, and that's one set A. And then make another set A in exactly the same way. Now you need to make a set B, so take the 4 half square triangles that you need for set B. You can see which ones they are here, and place them 3 facing one way, and the one in the top right facing the other way, but just you can see the prints here, you can see how it goes together. So just double check that yours looks exactly the same. So the top row, and then sew the bottom row. Press the seams in opposite directions, and then place the top row right sides facing with the bottom row. Pop that pin in to match the centre seam, and then pin on the left hand side. Do make sure that the raw edges on the sides and the top are matching up, just so that you get a nice even matching finish. And then sew the top row to the bottom row. And now you've got a one set B, and repeat that to make another identical set B. So now you've finished your corner HST blocks. You've got 2 set A and 2 set B, so you're now ready to assemble them. Assembling the block. So now you've made all your corner HSTs and your centre ones, you can lay out all the fabric. So we've got the whole squares, and we've got the corner and the centre HSTs. So lay them out following the block diagram. This helps particularly if you're using the other colourway, the China Blues colourway, then we've printed the diagram for this in both colourways to help. So you can lay them out one row at a time, or like I did with Hunter Star Block 1, you can put out all the whole squares and then take out all the HSTs. But just try and keep your centre HST blocks and your corner ones in piles, just because it makes it a lot easier. Otherwise it's really hard if you get them mixed up to try and work out which one goes where. So when you've put all the centre HSTs, you can now see that the star has been formed, and you've got all of the different fabrics. So once you're happy that everything is correct, double check it, then you can sew everything together. And also you can see how the star formation is working. So sew all of the pieces together in row 1, then in row 2, making sure that you match the seams of those centre HSTs, then do row 3, again matching seams, and then sew together row 4. Once that's done, they will all look like this, and just like before, I've pressed the seams in opposite directions, so the odd number rows go one way and the even go another, and it just helps to match up your seams and to nest them. So now you can sew them all together. So sew row 1 to row 2, make sure that you match up the seams, then row 2 to row 3, and then row 3 to row 4. And then it will look like this, and Hunter Star block 3 is now finished. I've pressed the seams open, but you can see that lovely variegated effect you get of using all those different fabrics. You've finished all of your Hunter Star blocks.